Pete Hegseth was reviewing routine Pentagon security footage at 2:47 a.m. when he saw something that made his blood freeze. His most trusted deputy, the man he'd promoted just 6 months ago, was photographing classified documents in his own office. But what Hegseth discovered next about this betrayal would shake the entire U.S. defense establishment to its core. The fluorescent lights of the Pentagon's 23rd floor cast an eerie glow across Pete Hegseth's office as he sat alone, his eyes glued to multiple security monitors. Working late nights wasn't unusual for the Secretary of Defense, but tonight felt different. The intelligence reports from the CIA last week had been deeply troubling. There were whispers of a leak within the Pentagon, someone with high-level clearance selling America's most guarded secrets. But they had no concrete evidence and no suspect. Hegseth took a sip of his cold coffee and focused on the security camera feeds from the 14th floor offices. Most were dark and empty, but one room still had its lights on. General David Richardson's office. Hegseth's most trusted deputy and close friend. David's still working, he muttered to himself. Richardson was always meticulous and hard-working, often staying late to perfect his reports and develop strategies. But what he saw next made his blood run cold. Richardson was systematically photographing classified documents spread across his desk with professional precision. Each movement was calculated, each shot carefully framed. Hegseth's heart began pounding against his chest. "This can't be happening," he said aloud. Maybe he was misunderstanding what he was seeing. Perhaps Richardson was simply digitizing files for archival purposes. But when he zoomed in with the security camera, what he witnessed destroyed any hope of innocent explanation. Richardson was using professional espionage equipment that Hegseth recognized from counterintelligence briefings. A specialized microcamera designed for document photography and an advanced scanner capable of reading documents in complete darkness. This wasn't coincidence. This was planned, systematic espionage. Hegseth's hands began trembling. He had personally promoted Richardson 6 months ago, making him responsible for some of the Pentagon's most classified projects. Richardson was one of only 5 people with access to America's most critical defense secrets, and now he was stealing them. His first instinct was to activate emergency protocols immediately, but something made him stop. If he was wrong, he could destroy an innocent man's career forever. If he was right, this could be the biggest security breach America had ever faced. He needed more evidence. He accessed the Pentagon's security system and began reviewing Richardson's movements over the past weeks. Richardson wasn't just a colleague. They had served together in Afghanistan, shared foxholes, saved each other's lives. Richardson's wife Sarah was Jennifer's closest friend. Their families spent weekends together. Their children attended the same school. The first anomaly had occurred last Tuesday night. Richardson had entered the building at 11:45 p.m. According to official records, there were no emergency meetings scheduled. The second anomaly was Friday night when Richardson again worked late hours without authorization. Hegseth decided to dig deeper. He requested access to Richardson's phone records and coordinated with the FBI's counterintelligence division. At this point, there was no turning back. Either Richardson was innocent and Hegseth was destroying a friendship, or America's national security was in jeopardy. The first results came at 6:30 a.m. Richardson's phone contained encrypted messages. The encryption was sophisticated, military-grade software. NSA's crypto experts were working to decode them. Meanwhile, Hegseth had prepared for a normal day with Richardson, acting as if he suspected nothing. At 8:07 a.m., Richardson arrived with his usual punctuality. He was smiling and energetic despite working until 3 a.m. "Good morning, Pete," he said cheerfully. "I saw your office lights on when I was leaving. Is everything all right?" Hegseth's stomach churned. Did Richardson know he was being watched? Just routine security reviews, he said naturally. You were up late too. Which project were you working on? The new Asia-Pacific strategy, Richardson replied without hesitation. Pentagon's revision of our China policy. Very complex process. This was true. Richardson was officially involved in that classified project. But now Hegseth questioned every word, analyzing facial expressions and searching for signs of deception. Throughout the morning, regular meetings continued. Hegseth carefully observed Richardson during every interaction. Was there any change in his demeanor? Did he seem nervous? But Richardson was a professional soldier. If he was conducting espionage, he was experienced enough not to give himself away. During lunch, Richardson approached with what seemed an innocent invitation. Pete, tonight is Sarah's birthday. Would you and Jennifer like to join us? Under normal circumstances, this would be routine. But everything seemed suspicious now. Of course, Hegseth said. What time? 7 o'clock, small celebration at home. When Hegseth returned home, he faced an agonizing dilemma. He couldn't explain the situation to Jennifer without compromising the operation. But attending a social gathering while suspecting the host of treason felt unbearable. At 7 p.m., the Hegseth family arrived at the Richardson house. The home looked warm and welcoming. Sarah was celebrating her birthday, greeting guests with characteristic warmth. The children played in the backyard. Everything appeared normal. Perhaps Hegseth was becoming paranoid. During dinner, Richardson spoke about Pentagon operations and strategic developments. He shared detailed information about Afghanistan withdrawal processes. None was technically classified, but it was comprehensive, demonstrating his deep involvement in high-level planning. By the way, Pete, Richardson said as coffee was served, I have an early meeting tomorrow morning. Trade discussions with the Chinese consulate. I'll be the only Pentagon representative attending. This information hit Hegseth like a physical blow. A meeting with the Chinese consulate? It was highly unusual for Richardson to be involved in diplomatic discussions. Such meetings were typically coordinated through the State Department. After returning home, Hegseth called the NSA emergency line. Richardson claims he has a meeting with the Chinese consulate tomorrow. Is this legitimate? The response was as feared. Negative, sir. No such meeting exists in any official records. Now Hegseth was certain. Richardson was conducting espionage, and tomorrow might be executing the biggest intelligence transfer yet. It was time for decisive action. Working through the night, Hegseth coordinated a comprehensive operation. FBI counterintelligence, NSA surveillance teams, and Pentagon security would work together. Richardson would be followed from the moment he left his house, but Hegseth wanted to catch him transferring classified information. At 7 Richardson arrived at his office with usual precision. Hegseth was waiting. Good morning, David. How's your schedule today? Exceptionally busy and important, Richardson replied enthusiastically. The Chinese consulate meeting could be significant for American interests. We might open a new chapter in Asia-Pacific policy. What topics will be covered? Hegseth probed. Richardson hesitated briefly. General security matters, regional stability, economic cooperation. Hegseth knew Richardson was lying. The hesitation, vague response, and non-existent meeting confirmed his fears. At 10:30 a.m., Richardson left his office. Hegseth's surveillance team began following using multiple vehicles and tracking equipment. Richardson didn't head toward any diplomatic facility. Instead, he drove toward a secluded area outside Washington, D.C. 45 minutes later, Richardson stopped next to an old abandoned factory building. The structure looked derelict, but Hegseth's reconnaissance team had discovered it was used for clandestine meetings. 5 minutes later, A black sedan with diplomatic plates arrived. Two individuals emerged, one Asian, likely Chinese, and one American. Both carried briefcases and moved with professional confidence. Richardson met them, and all three entered the building. Hegseth's team had surrounded the building with advanced listening devices. Every word was being recorded. What they heard was devastating. Richardson's voice. The Asia-Pacific defense strategy isn't finalized, but I have access to all drafts. America plans to strengthen military installations in Japan and South Korea. New missile systems will be deployed against Chinese expansion. Here are photograph documents including troop deployments and weapon specifications. Chinese operative. This information is extraordinarily valuable. Your payment of $2.5 million has been transferred to your account. Richardson, this will be the final transfer. The risks are increasing. Secretary Hegseth is showing signs of suspicion. My cover may be compromised. Hearing this, Hegseth felt his blood drain. Richardson knew he was suspected and had been monitoring Hegseth's behavior with counterintelligence skills. American operative. Don't worry, David. We have resources to ensure your safety. If necessary, we'll extract you to Russia. You would be well protected. Richardson, I prefer remaining in my Pentagon position as long as possible. The intelligence value is too important to abandon. I can cause more damage from inside the system. Hegseth had heard enough. Richardson wasn't just conducting espionage, he was planning maximum damage to American security while maintaining his trusted position. Initiate arrest operations, Hegseth commanded. All units move in now. FBI tactical teams breached the building simultaneously. Richardson and his contacts were caught unprepared. Richardson had classified documents scattered across a table, while the Chinese operative possessed recording equipment and cash. When Richardson saw Hegseth entering with FBI agents, his face showed shock, disbelief and resignation. Pete, how did you discover this? How could you do this, David? Hegseth approached his former friend, struggling with emotions. When I promoted you, was it all part of a plan to betray America? Was our friendship just deception? Richardson hung his head in shame. You can't understand the complexity of this situation, Pete. There are factors you know nothing about. Then explain it, Hegseth demanded. Help me understand how a decorated soldier could sell his country's secrets. Why did you do this? Money? Revenge? What could justify this betrayal? Richardson experienced painful silence before speaking, barely above a whisper. Pete, do you remember how old my son Michael was when he died in Syria? Hegseth was taken aback. Richardson's son Michael had been killed in action 3 years earlier. What does Michael's sacrifice have to do with your betrayal? Michael died because of falsified Pentagon intelligence reports, Richardson said, tears flowing. I discovered the errors that led to his death weeks before the mission. I wrote warnings, submitted recommendations, requested postponement. Every warning was ignored. My son died because of institutional negligence. David, we both served in combat zones. We understood the risks. Tragic losses are reality of warfare. But Michael's death was preventable. Richardson continued with intensity. I had proof that intelligence was fabricated by contractors seeking to prolong contracts. I presented evidence that targets were civilian facilities. I warned the mission would result in unnecessary casualties. Nobody cared because the operation was already approved. Hegseth could understand Richardson's pain, but this couldn't justify betraying national security. Even if the system failed Michael, how does selling secrets to China help? How does this honor his memory? It's revenge against a system that killed my son, Richardson replied bitterly. This country's leadership sacrificed Michael for political convenience, so I decided to make them pay. The money is for Michael's daughter, my granddaughter Emma. She'll never know her father because of Pentagon lies, but she'll be financially secure. David, your actions have endangered America's security and put thousands of soldiers at risk. You've compromised operations protecting innocent people worldwide. Richardson fell silent, realizing he had no moral defense. FBI agents began handcuffing him and reading his rights. Hegseth spoke one final time. David, I understand your pain about Michael's death, and I share your anger about institutional failures. But what you've done dishonors his memory and betrays everything he fought for. If Michael could see your actions today, would he be proud? Upon hearing these words, Richardson broke down completely, sobbing uncontrollably. No, he said through tears, Michael would not be proud. He would be ashamed. I've become everything he fought against. As Hegseth drove back to the Pentagon, he was overwhelmed by conflicting emotions. He felt profound sadness about losing a trusted friend, but also satisfaction about protecting America's security. The betrayal cut deeply personally, but duty to country had to take precedence. The next day, Richardson's arrest became headline news internationally. Security protocols throughout the Pentagon were immediately reviewed and strengthened. Hegseth developed new procedures to prevent similar breaches and implemented enhanced monitoring systems. 1 week later, Hegseth visited Richardson's wife, Sarah. She appeared completely broken by events. Pete, did David really do these things? Unfortunately, Sarah, everything is true. David was selling classified information. I'm deeply sorry. Why would he do something so horrible? Sarah asked desperately. Was our marriage built on lies? Hegseth didn't reveal the complete truth about Michael's death and Richardson's revenge motivation. I don't know all his motivations, Sarah. Sometimes people make terrible decisions that destroy their lives and hurt those they love. That evening, Jennifer was waiting with concern. How are you handling this? David's betrayal must be incredibly difficult. I feel devastated, Hegseth admitted. David was someone I trusted absolutely, considered family, but I did what duty required. Richardson betrayed our country and endangered lives. You did the right thing, Pete. Richardson's problems don't justify selling America's secrets. I understand intellectually, but emotionally it's complicated. It's especially difficult when betrayal comes from someone you've shared life and death experiences with. Months later, Richardson was tried in federal court on multiple charges, including espionage, treason, and conspiracy. After reviewing overwhelming evidence, the jury found him guilty on all charges. He received 25 years in federal prison without parole. Hegseth attended the sentencing hearing. As Richardson was led away in shackles, he looked at Hegseth one final time. Pete, he said quietly, do you think you could ever forgive me? Hegseth considered carefully before responding. David, I cannot forgive the betrayal of our country and endangerment of American lives. But I understand that grief and anger drove you to terrible decisions. I'm sorry about Michael's death and your family's pain. Richardson nodded solemnly and was led away. Hegseth would never see him again, marking the end of a friendship that survived combat but not betrayal. This incident became one of the most challenging experiences in Hegseth's career. He had protected America's security but lost a trusted friend. Security protocols throughout the Pentagon were transformed, implementing new oversight mechanisms. The principle of absolute vigilance became embedded in Pentagon culture. In Hegseth's office, an old photograph of him and Richardson during Afghanistan deployment remained on his desk. The image captured two soldiers, arms around each other's shoulders, smiling with camaraderie from shared danger. That photograph served as a constant reminder of how dramatically things had changed. Following Richardson's conviction, Hegseth found himself questioning other relationships and wondering about colleagues' loyalty. Who else might be hiding secrets? became a persistent question affecting his sleep and ability to trust completely. But Hegseth understood he had to continue making difficult decisions to protect America's security. The Richardson case was concluded, but it wasn't the first betrayal in intelligence history, and wouldn't be the last. Vigilance had to be balanced with practical necessity of trusting colleagues. Security cameras throughout the Pentagon were now monitored with greater intensity. Every employee's movements, computer access, and communication patterns were tracked for suspicious activities. The principle of trust but verify became fundamental to Pentagon operation. The security breach Hegseth detected that night became the starting point for one of the most comprehensive counterintelligence operations in American defense history. The investigation expanded beyond Richardson's activities and uncovered a sophisticated international espionage network. When Richardson's transmitted information was analyzed, intelligence officials discovered China had obtained detailed knowledge about America's Asia-Pacific strategic planning. Chinese military planners had used this intelligence to develop countermeasures for American capabilities and adjust deployment strategies. This devastating breach led to comprehensive security system overhaul. Access controls for classified information were redesigned with multiple authentication requirements. Personnel clearance procedures were enhanced with frequent background investigations and financial monitoring. The most significant change Hegseth advocated was implementing a buddy system for accessing sensitive materials. Under this protocol, no individual could access top-secret documents without a second authorized person present. This made solitary espionage activities virtually impossible. These measures were designed to prevent Richardson case repetition. However, Hegseth remained realistic about limitations. Espionage could never be completely eliminated, but proper procedures could make such activities significantly more difficult and easier to detect. During Richardson's imprisonment, Hegseth wrote him a personal letter. "David, while I cannot approve of your betrayal, I understand that grief over Michael's death created anger leading to terrible decisions. Michael's sacrifice meant something important, and intelligence failures feeding to his death represented serious institutional problems deserving attention. However, espionage was never the appropriate way to address those problems or honor Michael's memory. I hope during imprisonment you find opportunities for reflection and discover peace with your decisions." Richardson never responded directly. However, during legal proceedings, he told his attorney that receiving understanding from Hegseth provided emotional comfort during difficult moments, even though he knew his actions were unforgivable. Years later, when Hegseth retired from Secretary of Defense position, the Richardson counterintelligence operation was still cited as one of his most significant achievements. However, Hegseth never considered this episode a personal victory because the human cost of losing a trusted friend continued causing pain. The friendship he lost represented something important about bonds formed between soldiers serving together in dangerous circumstances. Richardson's betrayal had not only damaged American national security, but destroyed the trust and camaraderie that made military service meaningful personally. During post-retirement years, Hegseth began consulting on security and counterintelligence matters, sharing experiences with younger military officers and intelligence professionals. He frequently used the Richardson case as educational example when training new personnel about psychological and emotional challenges of counterintelligence work. The most dangerous security threat, Hegseth would regularly tell audiences, is never the obvious enemy attacking from outside our institutions. The greatest danger always comes from trusted insiders who have been compromised, corrupted, or motivated to betrayal by personal grievances. The most psychologically difficult aspect of counterintelligence work is accepting that today's trusted colleague could become tomorrow's enemy, and that personal friendship must never override professional vigilance and national security obligations. This story became legendary within Pentagon circles and broader American intelligence community. New officers studied the Richardson case as a comprehensive example of how personal tragedies could be exploited by foreign intelligence services to recruit highly placed American officials. The case demonstrated the importance of continuous monitoring, careful observation of behavioral changes, and courage required to investigate even most trusted colleagues when evidence suggested potential compromise. Hegseth's decisive action that night, when he observed Richardson's suspicious activities, had prevented what could have been a far more devastating intelligence disaster. His willingness to pursue investigation despite personal friendship had protected ongoing operations, saved lives, and preserved America's strategic advantages in a critical world region. The Richardson betrayal also led to enhanced cooperation between American intelligence agencies and improved information sharing about potential security threats. The case proved that sophisticated foreign intelligence operations required equally sophisticated American responses, with multiple agencies working together to identify, investigate, and neutralize threats before they could cause significant damage. This comprehensive story of betrayal, investigation, and ultimate justice represented both personal challenges faced by those responsible for protecting national security and institutional resilience that enables America to survive and overcome even the most serious internal threats. Pete Hegseth's handling of the Richardson's case became a model for how personal integrity and professional duty must work together to safeguard the nation's most critical secrets. The immediate aftermath of Richardson's arrest sent shockwaves throughout the entire intelligence community. Within hours of the operation's conclusion, secure communications networks were buzzing with encrypted messages between agencies. The CIA, NSA, FBI, and Pentagon all initiated immediate damage assessments to determine the full scope of compromised information. Special committees were formed overnight to review every operation Richardson had accessed during his tenure in the sensitive position. The Chinese operative captured during the raid, identified as Colonel Zhang Wei, was a senior intelligence officer with the People's Liberation Army Strategic Support Force. His presence in the United States under diplomatic cover had been unknown to American counterintelligence services. Zhang's capture provided an unprecedented opportunity to understand Chinese intelligence operations on American soil. During intense interrogation sessions, he revealed details about a broader network of assets that had been operating undetected for years. The American collaborator, Robert Sterling, proved to be even more valuable from an intelligence perspective. A former CIA operative who had been dismissed for psychological instability 3 years earlier, Sterling had harbored deep resentment against the agency that had ended his career. His recruitment by Chinese intelligence services represented a sophisticated understanding of American personnel vulnerabilities. Sterling's knowledge of CIA operational procedures had enabled Chinese operatives to avoid detection while recruiting additional assets within the intelligence community. The investigation that followed Richardson's arrest uncovered a web of corruption that extended far beyond what anyone had initially imagined. Financial records revealed a complex money laundering operation involving offshore accounts in 7 different countries. The Chinese had been using a combination of cryptocurrency transactions, shell corporations, and traditional banking systems to fund their espionage operations while maintaining plausible deniability. Over the following 6 months, the Joint Task Force established to investigate the network identified and arrested 12 additional individuals. Among them were 2 State Department employees who had been providing information about American diplomatic strategies, 1 NSA contractor who had been selling signals intelligence capabilities, and a Navy officer who had compromised submarine patrol routes in the South China Sea. Each arrest revealed new layers of the conspiracy and demonstrated the systematic nature of Chinese intelligence penetration. The psychological toll on Hegseth during this extended investigation was enormous. Every day brought new revelations about people he had worked with, trusted and considered colleagues. The paranoia that had begun with Richardson's betrayal expanded into a comprehensive questioning of every relationship within the government. Sleep became increasingly difficult as Hegseth found himself analyzing past conversations, looking for signs he had missed, wondering how many other betrayals had gone undetected. Jennifer noticed the changes in her husband's behavior immediately. The man who had once been decisive and confident now second-guessed every decision. Simple social interactions became fraught with suspicion. When longtime friends called to arrange dinners or weekend gatherings, Hegseth would spend hours afterward questioning their motivations. Had the invitation been genuine, or was someone gathering intelligence about his state of mind? The security protocols implemented in response to the Richardson case fundamentally changed how classified information was handled throughout the government. The buddy system that Hegseth had advocated was expanded into a comprehensive oversight framework. Every access to classified materials now required not only a second person present, but also digital logging of exactly which documents were viewed for how long and for what stated purpose. The administrative burden was significant, but the security benefits were undeniable. Technology played an increasingly important role in the new security measures. Advanced behavioral analytics software was installed throughout government facilities, monitoring everything from computer usage patterns to physical movements within secure areas. The system could detect anomalies in employee behavior that might indicate stress, coercion, or preparation for unauthorized activities. While some criticized these measures as invasive, the Richardson case had demonstrated the necessity of such comprehensive monitoring. International relationships were also significantly affected by the revelations. The discovery that Chinese intelligence had penetrated so deeply into American defense planning forced a complete re-evaluation of information sharing with allies. Countries that had enjoyed relatively open intelligence cooperation with the United States suddenly found themselves subject to much more restrictive protocols. The trust that had been built over decades of partnership had to be carefully reconstructed with new safeguards in place. The Chinese government's response to the arrests was predictably indignant. Through diplomatic channels, they claimed that Jiang Wei was a legitimate trade representative who had been framed by American intelligence services. They demanded his immediate release and threatened economic retaliation if their demands were not met. However, the overwhelming evidence of espionage activities made their protests appear hollow and further damaged Chinese-American relations. Within the Pentagon, the Richardson case became a mandatory case study for all personnel with security clearances. New employees were required to attend extensive briefings about the psychological and financial pressures that could make them vulnerable to foreign recruitment. The briefings included detailed discussions of Richardson's motivations, the warning signs that had been present, and the devastating consequences of his actions. Sarah Richardson's life was completely destroyed by her husband's betrayal. Within weeks of his arrest, she lost her job as an elementary school teacher when parents complained about having their children taught by the wife of a traitor. The family home had to be sold to pay legal fees, and she was forced to move to a different state to escape the constant media attention. Her own security clearance, which she had maintained for part-time consulting work, was immediately revoked, ending any possibility of continuing her career in government service. The most heartbreaking aspect of the case was the impact on Richardson's granddaughter, Emma. At only 8 years old, she was too young to understand why her grandfather had been taken away, or why her family was suddenly treated with suspicion and hostility by their community. Child psychologists worked with the family to help Emma process the trauma, but the long-term effects of her grandfather's actions would likely affect her for the rest of her life. Emma's situation highlighted one of the most cruel ironies of Richardson's betrayal. He had justified his espionage activities as a way to provide financial security for his granddaughter after her father's death. Instead, his actions had guaranteed that she would grow up in poverty and shame, forever marked as the granddaughter of a traitor. The money he had received from Chinese intelligence was seized by the government as proceeds of criminal activity, leaving the family with nothing. The media coverage of the Richardson case was intense and often sensationalized. News outlets competed to uncover new details about the spy ring, sometimes publishing information that compromised ongoing investigations. The constant attention made life even more difficult for the families of those involved, while potentially alerting other foreign operatives to American counterintelligence capabilities. Congressional hearings were inevitable once the scope of the security breach became public. Hegseth found himself testifying before multiple committees, explaining the timeline of events and defending the actions taken to apprehend Richardson. Some congressmen praised his vigilance and decisive action, while others questioned why the security systems had failed so completely in the first place. During one particularly contentious hearing, a senator from Richardson's home state aggressively questioned whether Hegseth had acted too hastily in authorizing the surveillance operation. Secretary Hegseth, the senator asked, "How can we be certain that you didn't violate General Richardson's constitutional rights by monitoring his activities without a warrant?" Hegseth's response was measured but firm. "Senator, every action taken in this investigation was conducted within the legal framework established for national security matters. General Richardson was not a private citizen. He was a government employee with access to classified information who had exhibited suspicious behavior. The surveillance was conducted under authorities specifically designed to protect national security, and every step was reviewed by legal counsel. The political implications of the Richardson case extended far beyond the immediate security concerns. The revelation that Chinese intelligence had achieved such deep penetration into American defense planning became a major issue in the presidential campaign. Opposition candidates used the case to argue that the current administration had been weak on national security, while administration supporters pointed to Hegseth's successful identification and arrest of the spy ring as evidence of effective counterintelligence capabilities. International intelligence sharing agreements had to be completely renegotiated in light of the security breach. Allied nations that had enjoyed relatively open access to American intelligence now found themselves subject to much more restrictive protocols. The Five Eyes intelligence alliance between the United States, United Kingdom, Canada, Australia, and New Zealand required extensive review to ensure that no other penetrations had occurred. The psychological warfare implications of the Richardson case were also significant. The knowledge that a senior American defense official had been compromised created doubts about the reliability of intelligence assessments and strategic planning. Foreign adversaries could reasonably assume that their own security had been enhanced by Richardson's activities, while American allies questioned whether information shared with the United States might have been passed to hostile nations. Training programs for intelligence and security personnel were completely overhauled in response to the Richardson case. New emphasis was placed on identifying the psychological and financial pressures that could make individuals vulnerable to recruitment by foreign intelligence services. Regular psychological evaluations became mandatory for personnel with access to the most sensitive information, despite concerns about privacy and the potential for discrimination. The technology used in the Richardson operation also sparked significant discussion about the balance between security and privacy in government facilities. The advanced surveillance systems that had captured Richardson's espionage activities were expanded throughout the intelligence community, but civil liberties advocates raised concerns about the implications for employee privacy and constitutional rights. Years after Richardson's conviction, the case continued to influence American counterintelligence operations. The methods used to detect his activities became standard operating procedures. while the psychological factors that contributed to his recruitment were incorporated into vulnerability assessments for all personnel with security clearances. The Richardson case had fundamentally changed how America approached the protection of its most sensitive secrets. The human cost of the Richardson betrayal extended far beyond the immediate participants. Trust within the intelligence community had been severely damaged, requiring years of careful rebuilding. Relationships between colleagues became more guarded, as everyone understood that the person sitting next to them might be the next security threat. The paranoia that Hegseth experienced became endemic throughout the system, affecting efficiency and morale. For Pete Hegseth personally, the Richardson case remained the defining moment of his career in public service. The decision to investigate his closest friend, despite the personal cost, demonstrated the kind of moral courage required for national security leadership. However, the emotional toll of that decision continued to affect him long after his retirement from government service. The comprehensive reforms implemented after the Richardson case represented one of the most significant changes to American intelligence and security practices since the creation of the Department of Homeland Security. While the measures were costly and sometimes cumbersome, they were necessary to restore confidence in the government's ability to protect its most sensitive information from foreign adversaries. The story of Pete Hegseth's discovery of David Richardson's betrayal ultimately became more than just a counterintelligence success story. It represented the eternal struggle between personal loyalty and professional duty, between trust and verification, between the human connections that make life meaningful and the vigilance required to protect national security. In choosing duty over friendship, Hegseth had demonstrated the kind of moral courage that democratic societies depend upon for their survival.